Fully insured plans are not primarily engineered to aggressively lower your costs or optimize outcomes for your workforce. In fact, they do just the opposite.
So the safety net many employers think they're purchasing is often an expensive illusion that limits their options.
Oh, most definitely. They're not really buying peace of mind in the current structure. They're leasing limited control, and they're paying a premium price for the privilege of reduced visibility. They save 7.5% the first year while stabilizing their budgeting process. You paid the premiums. You technically own the claims data. Keeps you in a rental arrangement with limited control. And self-funding opens a door to owning the strategy and the outcomes and ultimately lowering the costs.
Today, let's start with a question that should make every CFO and CEO pause. What if one of your largest expenses after payroll was quietly functioning like a hidden tax? You pay it every month, it keeps rising, and often faster than wages or inflation. And you have almost no idea where the money is actually going or whether any of it was actually truly avoidable. You can forecast labor costs with precision. You can model supply chain expenses down to the variability band. But healthcare, you get a renewal number and you write the check.
Yeah, most definitely. Most employers think they're buying protection and simplicity. What they're really buying is lack of visibility, misaligned incentives, and very limited control over one of their biggest line items. Fully insured plans look clean and predictable on the surface, but underneath, they're often designed to protect the carrier's revenue stream far more than your bottom line or your employees' outcomes.
And today we're going to clarify how this system really operates on the real cost of being fully insured and showing you a clear, more strategic path forward. If you've ever stared at a renewal increase and wondered why your claims seemed manageable, but the bill wasn't, this episode is going to be for you. Welcome back to the Blueprints for Better Benefits. I'm Rodney Jr. and joined as always by my dad, Rod Sr. And this is where we help employers climb step by step out of the fog of incomplete information and into real clarity and control. Because most organizations aren't stuck because they lack intelligence. They're stuck at base camp because the information they've been given is incomplete, or worse, misaligned with their own financial and people priorities.
Here at Triforta, we serve as the Sherpa guide on this climb, helping employers see what's actually happening with their healthcare spend and equipping them with the tools to manage it proactively. Today's episode is one of the most important steps yet. We're exposing the true, often hidden cost of staying fully insured and show how shifting towards self funding or level funded models transforms healthcare from a black box expense you react to into a manageable financial strategy you actually control. So, if you're a CFO tired of unexplained renewal spikes, or a CEO watching margins compress year after year, or even an HR leader carrying the daily operational and communication weight of benefits, listen closely. By the end of this conversation, you'll have fresh perspectives, real data context, and practical next steps that you can act on.
So let's start at the beginning. When you sit down with CFOs or even business owners who've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, there's usually a belief they're holding on to pretty tightly about fully insured plans. And it's not because they haven't thought about it, it's because it's what they've been told over and over again. And it's what feels safe. So if you had to isolate it, what's the biggest myth most CFOs and employers still believe about fully insured plans? Is it about risk? Is it about simplicity? Or is it something deeper that's just been accepted as the way it works?
Yeah, I would say that it's truly simple, safe, and predictable in a way that benefits the employer. See, you pay a fixed premium, the carrier takes on the risk, and in return, you get peace of mind and protection from volatility. On paper, it all sounds reasonable, but that simplicity is largely an illusion. What you're actually trading is visibility into your own data, and you're trading leverage over cost drivers and the ability to manage the expense dynamically, all for the convenience of a single bundled payment.
And many leaders convince themselves that the convenience is worth it, right?
Yeah, they do, until the renewal comes in higher than expected and there's no clear explanation. They don't get much detail at all. And that's when the cracks they really start to show.
So, what feels like predictability on paper often hides massive inefficiency and misaligned incentives underneath. So, where do you typically see organizations begin to lose their footing with this model? Is it a lack of information? Is it a lack of control? Or is it more about how they've been conditioned to think about healthcare as an expense over time? Because from our vantage point, this doesn't usually come down to negligence or an intention. These are well run organizations, often with disciplined financial leadership. So, where specifically does the breakdown tend to occur year after year?
Well, it occurs primarily where they treat healthcare as a fixed hands-off expense instead of a dynamic, high impact cost center that it truly is. Employers they accept the bundle premium as just the cost of doing business without digging into what's driving that cost. So let me paint I'll try to paint a clear picture with an analogy that resonates hopefully with leaders who's if you've ever planned a company event, a retreat, or a large project. So this one probably can relate to. So imagine booking an all-inclusive resort for your annual leadership offsite event and one that where the upfront price covers all the rooms. It covers all the meals, the activities, spa services, and even some perks at the gift shop. Sounds convenient and budget friendly at first, but when you realize is that the resort owns or has tight partnerships with nearly every vendor on property and the restaurants, the excursion companies, and the spa and the retail shop. Sure, they source bids international or they source bids internally or from close partners. None of those internal bids are the most competitive available on the open market. In fact, they could easily run 20 to 50% higher than true street rates. Yet because everything is packaged as an all-inclusive and locked into the agreement you signed, you're stuck and you can't shop around for better value or redirect your spending. So the resort is essentially paying itself on every transaction while you foot the marked up bill without full transparency. And that's what our health insurance system is like today.
Yeah, and that's a great analogy, and honestly, a little uncomfortable when you think about how most employers actually buy healthcare today. Because what looks like convenience and predictability is really a lot of decisions being made for you without clear visibility, without real competition, and honestly, without much control. And over time, that just becomes the norm, even as the costs keep moving further away from what they probably should be.
No, definitely. And it should, because that's precisely how a fully insured health plan often operates. The carrier acts in that analogy as the resort operator, and you pay one fixed premium. They control or heavily influence the provider network, the pharmacy benefit manager, all the care pathways, and frequently have ownership, interests, or strong partnerships throughout the entire healthcare delivery system. So you lose all the practical ability to select the best in class vendors or negotiate true market rates for your specific workforce. And we say this play out repeatedly here in Nevada and across the country. A mining operation with a rural, physically demanding workforce faces long travel times for care and higher occupational injury rates, yet remains locked into a carrier's preferred network and pricing. Or a construction firm dealing with, seasonal revenue swings and tight margins, they absorb those marked up costs without real-time visibility. Even advanced manufacturing firms and logistic companies in the Reno and Sparks area with shift work and retention pressures, they pay high prices this type of structure. And hospitality groups with high employee volume and variable utilizations, they face the same challenges. The lack of transparency in cost that limits their ability to compete for talent is a real challenge.
And for most employers, that's where it gets really difficult to spot because nothing in that experience feels obviously broken. The plan is in place, employees have access to care, claims are getting paid, and from the outside, it all appears to be working the way it's supposed to. But underneath that surface, there's no clear line of sight into what things should cost versus what they actually cost, no real mechanisms to challenge it.
Mhm.
So, from the employer's perspective, they're doing exactly what they believe is the responsible thing, renewing coverage, managing budgets, and taking care of their people. But in reality, they may be operating inside a system where the pricing, the partnerships, and the incentives aren't necessarily aligned with their best interests. And maybe the most concerning part for most employers is that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. They don't even know they're overpaying or subsidizing the carrier's internal ecosystem. They just see the renewal number and they see it go up and accept it as normal. So let's take a look out a little bit from a wider perspective for a moment, because this isn't isolated to a few companies. What we're seeing right now, from 2025 through this time period, we're recording this session here at the beginning of May in 2026, is sustained and structural upward pressure on employer health costs. So, according to the latest Kaiser Family Foundation Employer Health Benefits Survey, the average annual family premiums reached nearly $27,000 in 2025. So that was up 6% from the prior year. And that marks the third straight year of increases at or above 6%. And individuals coverage just over $9,300 a year. So that was also up around 5%. And workers on average contributed a little over $6,800 towards family coverage out of their own paychecks. So looking ahead here through 2026 and the end of this year, projections range from 6.5 to 8.5% or higher increases depending on plan design changes, with some surveys showing employers bracing for immediate increases in upwards of 10% if no adjustments are made. So this is among the highest sustained growth periods and price increases in over a decade.
Mm.
And not to mention, pharmacy spend is one of the biggest accelerators. Specialty drugs now account for roughly half or more of the total drug spending in many plans. So, of course, we all have heard about GLP-1 medications, which are used for diabetes and now increasingly for weight management. Those have seen explosive utilization. And in some employer groups we've reviewed, that GLP-1 spend alone has jumped 50% or more year over year, and is now contributing meaningfully to overall trend. But biosimilars are entering more categories and often offer a potential cost deflator, but only and only if your plan has the visibility and flexibility to steer utilization towards those biosimilars. So over the last 12 to 18 months, carriers have really tightened underwriting and renewal practices in response to these pressures. Here in Nevada, the key blue collar sectors this hits especially hard is mining operations, which deal with rural access challenges and higher claims variability. And especially, the many construction firms and adjacent industries that support those mining organizations that we work with, they wrestle with cash flow sensitivity and seasonal patterns. And then there's the advanced manufacturing and logistics companies that are managing shift work demands and turnover, and hospitality groups balancing high employee volume with labor market competition. Many employers feel the squeeze on both margins and talent retention, yet they still remain locked into models that give them limited tools to respond proactively and do anything about lowering their costs.
And the gap between what's happening in the market and what most employers can actually see and manage is widening, and that's creating real strategic urgency for leadership teams. So, how does this lack of visibility show up beyond the P&L, especially in tight labor markets like ours in Nevada?
Well, it directly impacts talent and I would say retaining that talent. So when you can't clearly see or control costs, it becomes much harder to design competitive benefits packages. So mining and construction companies, They struggle to attract skilled tradespeople all the time. Especially when benefits feel like a black box. And we have quite a few advanced manufacturing employers here in the Reno market tell us retention suffers because they can't easily redirect savings into lower employee contributions or even enhance any wellness programs. And then some of the hospitality operators with large variable workforces that we work with find it difficult to compete on total compensation when healthcare costs keep eroding their margins. So, in essence, we're proposing on this climb and getting to the summit is an understanding that self-funding gives you visibility to turn benefits into a true talent advantage instead of just another cost.
This segment is brought to you by the people and platforms that make this show possible. First, Triforta. If you're an employer who's tired of runaway renewals, bloated, fully insured plans, and the feeling that your benefit strategy is working against you instead of for you, then hear us clearly. You do not have to play that game anymore. Help business owners fix broken health insurance. We bring cost containment strategies, self-funded captives, data intelligence, and real-world case studies that routinely save employers 6 and 7 figures without cutting benefits. If you want a benefits plan that actually rewards results, visit triforta.com and download our blueprints for better benefits. And second, Aperionics. If you run an insurance agency and you're still drowning in manual quoting, data entry, or commission reconciliation, you're leaving more than time on the table. You're leaving money. Aperionics is the automation layer built by insurance people for insurance people. AI quoting for carriers that don't have APIs. Instant policy data extraction, commission statement automation, proposal generation in seconds, not hours. Aperionics reduces operating costs and gives teams their time back so they can work at the top of their license. Learn more at aperionics.com. That's APEIRONIX.com. Triforta and Aperionics, 2 companies, 1 united mission. Fix what's broken, elevate what's possible, and help real people thrive. Now let's get back to the show. And here's the contrarian truth that challenges the conventional wisdom.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Fully insured plans are not primarily engineered to aggressively lower your costs or optimize outcomes for your workforce. In fact, they do just the opposite. They're structured to provide revenue stability for the carrier while meeting minimum regulatory requirements such as medical loss ratio rules. And that complete misalignment that makes meaningful cost reduction inside the fully insured box structurally difficult, if not impossible.
And so the safety net, many employers think they're purchasing is often an expensive illusion that limits their options.
Oh, most definitely. That's why we're providing this series of blueprints for better benefits is to provide this education because so many employers just don't realize the position they're stuck in, but that they do have a way to break free from that status quo. And really, they're not really buying peace of mind in the current structure. They're leasing limited control and they're paying a premium price for the privilege of reduced visibility.
Ain't that the truth? So let's bring this to life with real mid-market examples from right here in Nevada. Walk us through a couple of situations you've seen, including the internal tensions those leaders had faced.
Yeah, I'll think of quite a few, but one in particular, take a mining company with several hundred employees in the rural Nevada marketplace. Their claims experience, it looked relatively stable 1 year, yet the fully insured renewal, it still jumped significantly, well into the double digits with very little, as expected, detailed explanation. Of course, naturally, the CFO was frustrated. He could forecast everything else in the business, but felt blind on the healthcare, which don't blame him. So when we helped unlock the data, high cost imaging and specialty claims routed through those carrier affiliated facilities at significantly inflated rates, even though they call them discount, those became visible. The employer had been absorbing those markups without even realizing the full picture. So after reviewing the model that we presented, the leadership team faced a real decision moment. Either continue accepting the status quo or take control. So they ultimately, moved with our recommendation to a self-funded program and saw meaningful improvement in the following year. Contrast that with another example, a construction firm facing tight seasonal cash flow. The owner and the CFO they're just exhausted by unpredictable renewals that continuously disrupted their budgeting. So after working with us and moving to a self-funded structure, they immediately gained line of sight into pharmacy utilization, and we negotiated better PBM terms and redirected certain high cost care and turned what would have been another 12+% increase into a measurable savings. In fact, they saved 7.5% the first year while stabilizing their budgeting process. So we've seen similar patterns in advanced manufacturing operations in and around Reno, companies with shift workers and retention challenges. The HR director felt overwhelmed trying to explain rising deductibles and limited plan options to employees. Fully insured limit their ability to tailor benefits or manage chronic conditions common in the industry. And hospitality employers with large variable workforces face the same issue. The unclear costs made it harder to compete on total compensation packages and retain seasonal staff. So in each of these cases, the fully insured model created many different blind spots and a lot of internal tension that self-funding we were able to remove, turning healthcare from a reactive expense into something they could actively influence and manage. And of course, we always say you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's the big difference here.
Absolutely. So, for CFOs listening, let's get practical and slow this down a little bit. What
Mhm.
does the transition to better visibility actually look like in a financial model? Walk us through it step by step.
Yeah, happy to. So, it's more approachable than many expect once you see it all laid out. We typically build it in layers just to make it easy to understand and make the transition very simple and clear. So we layer in the baseline expected claims, using historical data adjusted for trend, demographics, industry factors, and regional considerations. So for a typical 150 to 300 employee Nevada group, this might start 140,000 to 170,000 per month, depending on the workforce profile. Then layer two adds the to that variability band. We account for normal month to month and seasonal swings, often plus or minus 15 to 20%. That creates a realistic operating range you can forecast cash flow against, and just like you do for labor and materials. Layer three brings in stop loss protection. So this includes specific stop loss caps on any single catastrophic claim, while aggregate stop loss puts a defined ceiling on the total annual exposure. So commonly set to about 125% of the expected claims. Now, instead of accepting a single fixed premium number with no underlying insight, what we're doing is we're working with a baseline and a manageable range and hard boundaries. So you can run scenarios. So, like, what if we improve chronic condition management by 8%? Or another scenario, what if we successfully redirect one $25,000 MRI claim to a freestanding center for less than 1,500 bucks? So you immediately see the financial impact in real time. So before self-funding even begins, many groups were simply adding 8 to 10% to last year's premium and really, hoping and praying for the best. After switching to our alternative funding structure and models that we lay out, they're actively modeling and managing the expense month to month. So the difference is in confidence and cash flow predictability, which is dramatic.
And that's the moment many finance leaders say it finally clicks for them. Healthcare, it starts behaving like every other operating expense.
Yeah, it certainly does exactly that. It moves from unpredictable black box to something you can model, you can monitor, and you can actively manage throughout the entire year.
So let's address the real world pushback head on because these conversations happen every day. What are the most common objections you hear?
Well, the loudest and most frequent often comes from the HR teams. So They often say, well, this sounds promising on the finance side, but the administrative burden is going to land squarely on us and the HR team. And we're already stretched thin managing benefits, compliance, employee questions, and open enrollment. And we understand, that concern is completely valid. But the good news is that with the right third party administrator, the right consulting firm, and analytics partners that are coordinating all of this, and care navigation support, all of that heavy lifting, ongoing claims monitoring, and high cost claims alerts, providing steering, detailed reporting, and even employee communication, that shifts away from the internal HR team completely. So many HR leaders we work with actually report less fire drill activity and more strategic focus once the plan is actively managed.
That's amazing. Now, what
Mhm.
about cash flow or risk related worries from the finance side?
Well, yeah, those are valid questions, and CFOs often ask us, what happens if we hit a bad claims month or a couple of high dollar cases back to back? Well, we mitigate that through detailed monthly forecasting, monthly claims reviews, guidance on reserve levels, and robust stop loss coverage. All of that is provides the layers and protections against any volatility whatsoever. So interestingly, most groups actually experience improved near-term cash flow because they stop front loading the full year's expected risk plus the carrier's margin in premiums or the carrier's profit. So the risk doesn't vanish. It just becomes defined, visible, and bounded. And so another frequent comment is the clients always say, well, our broker says the fully insured option is still the safest and simplest route. We hear this one a lot. Brokers operate under different incentives, of course, and relationships. And when you bring a CFO level side by side model with actual claims data and transparent projections into the discussion, the conversation shifts from traditional sales to strategic finance and operations dialogue. We also hear ownership or senior leaders ask, how do we explain this change to employees without causing confusion or pushback? So, one of the things that we address is, obviously clear benefits focused communication, framing it as we're taking control so we can protect your benefits long term. And that always turns skepticism into appreciation.
And so these objections are legitimate, but they're addressable with the right structure and partners.
Yes, yeah, we've done this hundreds, I think going on nearly 1,000 times now, and addressing them openly is part of building alignment across finance, HR, and leadership. This is something that we've we've done a lot and have a lot of familiarity with, and can really make it a smooth and simple process and easy for organizations. So before we move to next steps, let's quickly flag a few common pitfalls so we can sidestep them for employers. So let's kind of walk through that a little bit. So first, attempting the transition without the right experienced partners. Well, first you need a strong TPA for administration. That includes solid analytics for visibility and a stop loss carrier whose terms align with your risk tolerance. The second thing, under investing in clear communication with employees and internal stakeholders during the change. So, transparent messaging about what's improving and why turns potential skepticism into appreciation and support. Third, really important, selecting stop loss attachment points or plan design elements without thorough modeling tailored to your specific claims history or industry. That creates a problem. So, proper scenario planning prevents unwelcome surprises. When these areas are handled thoroughly, the move to greater control is a lot smoother, faster than leadership teams anticipate.
And for a CFO or an HR leader listening right now who's motivated to explore this further, what should their very next actions be?
Well, we just say, keep it simple and actionable. First thing to do, formally request your detailed claims data and pharmacy utilization reports for at least the last 24 months. You have the right to this information. You paid the premiums. Technically own the claims data. Second, work with a neutral party to build a side by side financial model comparing your current fully insured scenario against realistic self funded alternatives, including stop loss and reserve considerations. And third, schedule a focus meeting between finance and HR to review your top three current cost drivers. And these will be the high cost claims and discuss what real time visibility could change for budgeting, employee experiences. And if you'd like support running that initial model with no pressure, visit triforta.com and let us know you heard this episode. We'll help you get started with clear data and details to walk you through the entire process.
When we step back from all of this, the conversation isn't really about choosing between insurance products.
No, no, not at all. It's about deciding whether your organization continues to accept a system with built-in misaligned incentives or takes meaningful ownership over one of the largest, most visible expenses. We hear it all the time and we see it all the time that employee benefits is the number 2 or 3 most expensive line item on a P&L report next to payroll. And, fully insured keeps you in a rental arrangement with limited control. And self-funding opens a door to owning the strategy and the outcomes and ultimately lowering the costs.
And the real cost of staying fully insured isn't measured only in dollars on the P&L. It's also the lost opportunity for visibility, proactive management, better employee experiences, and stronger financial positioning over time. And healthcare costs continue to challenge employers across every industry, but fully insured plans often amplify the pressure through lack of visibility and incentives that don't fully align with yours. And what we've unpacked today shows that there is a clear, more strategic way forward, one grounded in data, transparency, and the ability to act in real time.
Most definitely. Self-funding isn't the destination, it's just the starting point.
If today's episode gave you a new perspective or even raised a few important questions, feel free to pass this along to a fellow CFO, CEO, or HR leader preparing for their next renewal cycle, or visit triforte.com to start the conversation and explore what a more transparent, controlled, and strategic plan design can look like for your organization. I'm your host, Rod Jr., and as always, thanks for climbing with us, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.